Part 2. Explain the importance of the railroad corporation on the national economy. The railroad company is incredibly important. In the late 1800s, the railroad industry was the economic engine that powered the economy. Yes, the pun is intended. Remember that this was partially a product of the Northern Republican subsidies that were created after the South left this Union during the Civil War. How important are the railroad industries? They changed time itself and developed the time zones that we have now to help prevent railroad accidents so that there'd be a standard time that all the railroads would run on. Why were the railroads so vital to the emerging industrial economy? Well, think about it. They connected the western natural resources to the developed industries out east. Railroads also created a large national marketplace. You could create blue jeans in New York City and sell them to California miners. All it took was a little trip on the railroad now. It means a huge new marketplace, and you can buy similar products all over the country. Railroads needed huge amounts of steel as well, so think about that. If they're laying thousands of miles of railroad tracks, you need railroad tracks, you need lumber for the railroad ties, you need coal to power the railroad itself. All of these new industries emerged largely because the railroad emerged. The railroad is also going to help promote immigration into the country and provide a steady stream of cheap labor. Immigrants were pulled to the United States by advertising that the railroad companies did overseas in order to promote these immigrants to come here and buy land in the United States. A lot of those immigrants couldn't immediately move out west, so they moved into cities and formed ethnic neighborhoods, which we'll get to later. The Irish and the Chinese worked to build the railroads themselves. Eventually, the Chinese are going to be sent away with the Chinese Exclusion Act, but the Irish are going to be allowed to stay and develop farms and move into cities and become cheap, unskilled labor. Many immigrants did buy land along the railroad routes. And remember, the railroad is going to be the main artery for farmers to reach the marketplace in the east to sell their products and to buy finished goods. We can see that here, this railroad, and you can see a homesteader out there starting to develop his farm. As new towns grew up, as railroads grew, new towns grew up overnight along the rail lines. Older towns could then specialize in a single product. For example, I worked in a town whose only product was building lollipop sticks. Right? Why didn't they make the whole lollipop? Because they could build the lollipop stick, they could put the sticks on the railroad train, which went right up to the door, and then they could take all those lollipop sticks on the train and take them to the candy factory. The railroad and other corporations began to be criticized by workers and consumers because the rights of the working class and the consumer class were increasingly trampled upon. This is, I believe, Cornelius Vanderbilt. His famous saying was, "The public be darned," and he controlled all the railroads, and he's literally holding up the common man here. And if they didn't do what they were told, the Union Army is in the background here to enforce what he wants. Many railroads had shady tactics. Ownership often used cutthroat techniques or illegal tactics to put other railroads out of businesses. These include rebates, kickbacks, espionage, sabotage. All of these were done in order to put competition out of business. Railroads were so important that when a company went out of business, oftentimes the national economy would go into a depression. They quickly realized that they shouldn't be fighting each other, because when they fight each other, they have to cut at each other's rates. And what ends up happening is, as the rates are slashed, they're making less and less money. And one day, they realize, why are we fighting each other? Let's work together. So the BO Railroad would take one half of town, and the B&M Railroad would take the other half of town. They call this pooling, right? So they would agree to divide the business up in a given area, and then they could raise their rates to whatever they wanted because there was no competition. This is a monopoly, and it created a class of amazingly wealthy individuals. The United States had never seen this amount of wealth in a given concentration of a few hands.